It is written, "A person does not live by bread alone, but by all that comes from the mouth of God." As we approach Thanksgiving, I feel it's imperative that we be grateful for all our blessings. I also feel that bread is so much of a blessing that we identify eating together as breaking bread. In keeping with using no refrigeration, I'll be making a simple bread without an oven in my mess kit fry pan called Bannock. I'll also share the story of a man so devout to God that he led a small group into the wilderness on a pilgrimage for their theological beliefs and laid the groundwork for a nation of religious freedom.
Well, it's true that one cannot live only on bread. There's no place in the inhabited world that does not have some type of traditional dough product. It's a global fundamental food source. I won't get into if bannock and fry bread are the same, nor will I delve into whether bannock's origin is Native American, Scottish, or from some other culture. What it is a fried bread that doesn't require yeast. This simple recipe is made from 4 or 5 ingredients depending on the flour used. Start with a half a cup of self-rising flour or a half a cup of all-purpose flour and add a half a teaspoon of baking powder. Next, add 2 tablespoons of dried milk. It's important to try to not get low-fat powdered milk like I have here, if possible, because it's the butter fat. That's why it's in there. You'll see that my bannock doesn't hold together so well because of the reduced fat. Add 1 tablespoon of butter flakes. Note, this also doesn't have fat. And an eighth of a teaspoon of salt. I used coarse salt. You will also need 1 tablespoon of vegetable shortening to fry the bread. Place all of these into a paper bag or a container marked Bannock, and you'll be ready to go.
It was already late fall as the group of just over 100 people sailed into the harbor seeking shelter and a new life. Among them was a group of religious refugees, hopeful for freedom from persecution for their beliefs. They made up just over half of the passengers, but were convicted in their fervent task of establishing a new church in the land they would now call home. It was this group's plan to gain a foothold and begin to build a place of worship so the others left behind could follow. With them was their spiritual leader, a man in his 50s, who had served as elder in their previous church. He traveled with his wife and 2 sons, and had accepted 2 young siblings who would be in his care. This man's name was William Brewster. As the only college-educated person among the group, Brewster was likely the key author of an agreement that would govern how the small group was to live together. He drafted a simple 1-page document that all the men signed, pledging their support. They named the covenant after the ship that had brought them from England, the Mayflower Compact. It was Brewster who had worked initially with a fellow parishioner, Robert Cushman, to obtain sponsorship from the Virginia Company in London for this expedition. Brewster was later replaced, when he went into hiding, by fellow passenger John Carver. The land patent provided supplies in return for certain guarantees to the company for the next 7 years. It would fall upon Elder Brewster to oversee the perseverance of the church through the desperate first winter, as almost half of those who had arrived in November of 1620 would not see the following summer. As you ponder the first permanent settlers in New England, let me ask that if you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to give it a thumbs up. Also, if you've already subscribed, thank you. If not, consider subscribing with the bell to be alerted to new videos I put out each week. I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments section. I look forward to hearing what you have to share. And, speaking of sharing, maybe you could share this video on your social media. It really does help me to bring you more content on camping, cooking, and New England history. For now, let me get back to using my mess kit fry pan to make pan bread bannock.
I'm here at the Portland Head Light on Cape Elizabeth in Maine, and this morning I'm going to make some bannock. Bannock is a type of bread that you make in a frying pan, and so from my mess kit all I'm going to need is the fry pan. I'm going to put these away over here. Let me get out my ingredients, and there's not very much. There's basically the bannock mix and some shortening. The first step is I'm going to measure 1/4 cup of water. We'll slowly add that to the bag, a little bit at a time. Close this up and just work that in. You want to make sure that it's all mixed. The mixture will be wet, and that's what you want it to be. We'll light the stove and set it to medium. I'm going to take half the grease that we have. Just put that right into the pan. Reserve the other half for the opposite side. Now it's important that you watch the grease to make sure that it does not become too hot. Coat the entire base of the pan as best you can. If that shortening starts to sizzle, your heat's too high, and just go ahead and turn that down. This does not require a high heat.
While that shortening comes up to temperature, I'm going to return to 1620. Governor William Bradford later wrote in his journal titled Of Plymouth Plantation, "They knew they were pilgrims." The original believers were part of a larger congregation in the town of Leiden, Holland, banished from their homes in the town of Scrooby because of their desire to be devout in a manner contrary to the Church of England. These separatists hoped to rejoin with their homeland politically under the King of England, James I, but that a 3,500-mile ocean would allow them to worship God as they saw fit. Different from the Puritans who wanted to purify the practices of the hierarchical Anglican Church, making it more godly and less like the Roman Catholics, the separatists wanted to break away into smaller, church-centric congregations that would choose their own pastor and have minimal hierarchical structure. This made the separatists much more dangerous to the government-run church authority. It was the separatists who would be the foundation of the Congregational Church. Despite having to join with strangers due to financial encumbrances, the saints, as they referred to themselves, sought to establish a place of worship in the new land. The Leiden Christians were concerned that their children were losing their English identity and were becoming more like the Dutch. They were also concerned about the outbreak of war between the Dutch and Spain. They did not anticipate, however, the hurdles the first saints and strangers would have to overcome, nor the reliance they would need to have on the indigenous people of the area. When they first set foot upon a large rock in the harbor of what would become Plymouth in December of 1620, they likewise did not know that starvation, sickness, and the harsh winter would claim the lives of 45 men, women, and children. But being a people of gratitude and recognizing the blessings bestowed upon those who survived, these pilgrims chose to give thanks to God in a 3-day feast in the fall of their first harvest, and invited their Native American friends, who outnumbered them 2 to 1, to join the celebration. Well, by no means a feast. Let's return to making bannock on a picnic table overlooking the Portland Head Light on a rainy morning along the coast of Maine.
Once you've got that shortening good and hot, what you want to do is you want to take your spoon, move that mixture to one side in the bag, and then start putting it right into the hot pan. I'm going to turn this bag inside out. Putting that right in like this. Scrape all of that mixture in and then press it down with the back of the pan, with the back of the spoon. I can see that I've missed a little bit. Press that right down. I'm going to move that over to the pot holder so that I can finish forming that nice and flat. I turn the heat up a little bit, keep an eye on it. And let that heat through. It'll take approximately 3 or 4 minutes for it to brown on one side and heat through.
As that bread starts to cook, I'll tell you more about who William Brewster was. A man of deep God-fearing conviction, William Brewster rose to prominence in the Separatist Church of Leyden under the Reverend John Robinson. Brewster had worked and worshipped with Robinson along with William Bradford since the group had met in Brewster's home in Nottinghamshire. As a young man, Brewster had attended Peterhouse College in Cambridge, where he learned Greek and Latin along with the other classical teachings. Although he did not receive a degree, Brewster became personal secretary for William Davison, who became the Secretary of State under Queen Elizabeth I. Traveling to Amsterdam with Davison, Brewster saw firsthand the religious tolerance of the Dutch people. It was Davison who was sent by the Privy Council to obtain the Queen's signature for the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth had been reluctant to sign the document and was furious with Davison after the execution took place, putting Davison in the Tower of London and putting Brewster out of a job. William Brewster returned to his home in Scrooby, where his father, whose health was failing, held the position of bailiff and postmaster and was living in the manor house. The younger Brewster secured his father's position in 1590 and held it until he left the country. We can't possibly know the impact on Brewster of the actions of Queen Elizabeth, who was head of the Church of England. But it is certain that he grew disillusioned with the church itself and helped to form a separatist movement that met on the grounds of Scrooby Manor. When the Queen died in 1603, James Stuart, the King of Scotland, assumed also the role of King of England. The following year, he issued a proclamation clamping down on the separatists. By 1607, the associates who had been meeting secretly in Scrooby had been discovered and arrest warrants were issued. Brewster resigned his position and fled with the congregation to Amsterdam. The Scrooby congregation then separated again from the larger group to form a church at Leyden. Still fighting the Church of England, Brewster, along with Edward Winslow and Thomas Brewer, set up a printing press where they could create pamphlets speaking out against the Anglican Church and sneak them back to England for distribution. The English ambassador to Holland requested the authorities put an end to the printing. Brewer was arrested, but Brewster evaded the law and went into hiding. This may be reason enough why a man in his 50s would agree to move his family on a perilous journey to the New World. He was asked by the congregation to lead them spiritually as they embarked on a new life in the wilderness. All of Brewster's family survived the first winter. Of the 2 children he'd agreed to care for, the girl, around age 5, died, as did her 2 siblings who were in the care of other families. The remainder of the Brewster children came to the Plymouth Colony on the next 2 ships from England, the Fortune and the Anne. I believe the Bannock needs to be flipped, so let me get back to the recipe before I finish with Elder Brewster.
It's important that you check the bottom of the pan. That should move around fairly easily. You don't want it to sticking a little bit in that spot. There we go. We're going to remove that from the heat and add the rest of the shortening. Now to flip this takes a little bit of practice. fork and my spoon. Reach around underneath with the fork. Actually, I'm going to do this. To flip this takes a little bit of practice. I'm going to do this down here. Over just like that. Now you can see that has started to cook on one side. I flipped it over so it'll form. You want to let it cook on the other side so that it forms into a nice piece of bread, like a biscuit. I push this down. All out towards the edge. Cook all the way through in the middle. So you can see I've spread it out towards the edge of the sides. I'm going to flip it again so we can get this side done. Using my spoon and my fork to reach up underneath. Now you can see that side is brown.
The bread's been cooking just about 4 minutes or so.
So you can see I've got a little bit of section over here that still needs to be cooked through.
And while the Bannock cooks all the way through, I'll finish up with the story of our Pilgrim father. Elder Brewster continued to lead the Plymouth Church until 1629, when Pastor Ralph Smith arrived, after which the respected deacon would still occasionally preach until his death in 1644. He outlived at least 3 of his children, 2 of whom were adults, who died in an epidemic in 1633. His wife Mary passed from this earth in 1627. Richard Moore, the 6-year-old indentured servant, lived to his 80s. He moved to the town of Salem and was still living during the witch hysteria of 1692. He is the only pilgrim with a marked gravesite. William and Mary Brewster are the ancestors to a number of famous people, including Bing Crosby, Julia Child, Katharine Hepburn, Zachary Taylor, and Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Their daughter Patience, who came aboard the Anne in 1623, married Thomas Prince the following year. Prince would go on to become the governor of Plymouth Colony following William Bradford. Patience was one of those who succumbed to the smallpox epidemic of 1633. She and Thomas had 4 children, including Hannah, from whom I am descended. That makes Elder William Brewster my 10th great-grandfather, and me one of as many as 35 million descendants worldwide. In the 24 years following his arrival on the shores of Cape Cod, William Brewster witnessed the growth in population from less than 4.5 dozen bedraggled survivors in the spring of 1621 to more than 14,000 when he went to be with his Maker in April of 1644.
If you find these videos helpful, please like, subscribe, and share.
Elder Brewster helped to form a foundation upon which this country built the right to worship God as one sees fit, or to not have any religion at all. I like to think that my grandfather would have discouraged the decision to turn from God, but would have supported a person's freedom to do so. As you sit down to break bread with your family and friends this Thanksgiving, please remember to give thanks for the blessing of the freedoms we enjoy in this great country, and may God bless you and all you hold dear.
As you can see, that's browned. It's completely dried all the way through. I'm going to shut off the heat. I'm going to eat my Bannock for some breakfast. Thank you for watching, and be sure to clean up your mess.